I don't know if the person sitting next to me right now is really Alex, but if I told you this was only the beginning, would you believe me? Don't look away. I'm going to tell you what happened after we left that hospital. Trust me, you'll wish you had never heard it. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, because the next part will take you deep inside the story of what we saw in that hospital. It was just supposed to be an old, abandoned building. That's what Mark kept telling me as we stood in front of the hospital's main entrance, staring up at its black, empty windows. Rain had just stopped, but the ground was still wet, reflecting the faint orange glow from a single streetlight. The place had been closed for decades, yet tonight it felt like it had been expecting us. We'd heard the stories, the kind people tell in hushed voices so they don't sound crazy. Patients left in the middle of the night. Records vanished. No one in town could agree on why the hospital shut down. It was always plumbing issues or funding cuts if you asked the wrong person. But if you asked the right one, they'd lean in and whisper about screams echoing from the basement and how the last staff to work there never came home. Mark had his camera, I had the flashlight, and between us, we had just enough bad judgment to push the front door open. It groaned, a low metallic sound that didn't match the wooden frame. The smell hit us first, not just mildew or rot, but something sour, faintly metallic like a coin you'd been holding too long. The main lobby looked like time had been paused mid-shift. Chairs lined the walls, some tipped over. A reception desk with a computer monitor still on its side. The faint crunch under our shoes was scattered glass, and every step made it echo across the empty space. But what struck me most was the air. It wasn't cold like you'd expect from a dead building. It was warm, just slightly, like the heating had been left on. We found the stairwell in the back, behind a door marked authorized personnel only. I half expected it to be locked, but it swung open with a hiss of stale air. The stairwell was lit not brightly, but with a weak yellow glow from overhead bulbs that should have been dead decades ago. Mark whispered, "Someone's here." He was half joking, but I could hear the edge in his voice. We descended slowly, the metal steps ringing under our weight. Each floor we passed had its own set of hallway doors, some closed, some hanging open like they'd been forced. We kept going down. I counted 2 floors, then 3, until the sign on the wall said, "Be basement ward." The air grew warmer here and heavier. My flashlight beam trembled over the peeling paint, catching glimpses of faded signs. Intensive care, isolation unit, morgue. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood ajar. Beyond it, I could see rows of hospital beds, lined neatly like soldiers. Mark moved first, stepping inside with his camera raised. I followed, and immediately I felt it. The air here wasn't just warm, it was body warm. I placed my hand on the nearest bed. The blanket was creased, the pillow slightly indented, and when I pressed my palm against the mattress, I felt heat radiating from it. Fresh heat. Not from a radiator, not from the air, from a body that had been lying there. Recently. Mark froze mid-shot, then whispered, "How is this possible?" I didn't answer. My eyes were darting from bed to bed, realizing it wasn't just one. Every single one of them had that same lived-in warmth. The sheets were smoothed but not cold, like someone had gotten up only minutes before we walked in. Somewhere down the hall, a sound echoed, soft, slow footsteps. Not hurried, not sneaking, just approaching. And that's where part 1 would end, with us both turning toward the hallway, the footsteps growing clearer, and neither of us ready to see who or what was about to walk in. Mark's camera made a faint clicking sound as he adjusted the focus toward the hallway. The footsteps were still there, steady, unhurried, and in the silence of the basement they sounded impossibly loud. I could feel my own heartbeat syncing with them, a dull thud in my ears. My instinct screamed to leave, but my legs felt heavy, rooted in place like the air itself had thickened around me. The light above flickered once, twice, before going steady again. I realized then that it wasn't just the footsteps we were hearing. There was another sound, softer, almost like fabric dragging across the floor, following just behind. Mark mouthed, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, gripping my flashlight so hard the metal bit into my palm. The hallway outside the ward was long, with doors on either side. The sound was coming from somewhere beyond the first corner. Mark took a slow step forward, raising the camera. I moved with him, my flashlight beam steady on the floor tiles. The air grew warmer still, and that metallic scent was stronger now, mixed with something faintly sweet, almost cloying. When we reached the corner, we stopped. The footsteps had stopped too. The silence was sudden and complete, like someone had hit pause on the world. Mark leaned just enough to peek around the edge, and I saw his shoulders tense. He didn't move for a second, then slowly stepped back toward me. His face was pale. "There's nothing," he whispered. "The hallway's empty." I didn't believe him. I edged forward and looked for myself. Sure enough, the corridor stretched ahead, doors shut tight on either side, ending in another heavy double door. No people, no movement, but the strange part was the floor. There were fresh, wet footprints, bare feet. They glistened in the dim light, trailing from the far end of the hall toward us, stopping just short of where we stood. Mark crouched to get a shot of them. The prints weren't smeared or faded. They looked like someone had just stepped out of a shower and walked barefoot. I wanted to tell him to stop, that we needed to leave, but then I felt it, a faint vibration under my feet. Subtle at first, like a passing truck overhead, except we were underground. We followed the prints, not speaking. Each step felt heavier. When we reached the double doors, Mark pushed one open just enough to peek inside. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness, revealing another ward, smaller than the first. This one had fewer beds, 6, maybe 7, and every one of them was neatly made. But in the center of the room there was a single wheelchair facing the far wall. Mark stepped inside, camera trained on it. I hesitated in the doorway, scanning the walls. There were faded posters, hand-washing reminders, emergency exits, things you'd expect. But in the far corner, partially hidden by shadows, was something else. A patient chart clipped to the wall. It looked newer than it should have been. The paper crisp, the ink unfaded. I walked over and read the name at the top. My stomach turned. It was my last name. Before I could process it, Mark let out a sharp gasp. I spun around. The wheelchair was facing us now, not the wall, and it had moved without a sound. That was enough. "We're leaving," I said, louder than I meant to. My voice bounced off the walls. Mark didn't argue. We backed toward the door, but before we could step out, something happened that made my skin crawl. Every bed in the room all at once creaked. Not like they were settling under old springs, but like someone had just lain down in each one at the same time. We froze. The air was hot now, suffocating. My flashlight beam swept across the beds, and that's when I saw it. The blankets were rising slowly, as if invisible bodies were under them, breathing. Mark's hand clamped down on my arm. "Go," he whispered, his voice trembling. We turned and bolted through the double doors, not caring about noise anymore. The moment we hit the hallway, the footsteps started again, this time behind us, faster, matching our pace. The exit sign for the stairwell was just ahead. We reached it, slammed the door open, and took the steps 2 at a time. But the sound didn't fade. It followed us up, floor after floor. And just when I thought we might make it out, we reached the ground-level landing and found the door chained shut from the outside. That's where part 2 would end, us trapped in the stairwell, the footsteps closing in from below, and the sound of something dragging against the wall getting closer by the second. The chain rattled under my hands as I yanked at it, the cold metal biting into my fingers. Whoever had locked this door didn't want anyone getting out or in. Mark was scanning the walls with his flashlight, searching for anything we might use to break it, but the stairwell was bare concrete and peeling paint. The footsteps were louder now, not a steady rhythm anymore, faster, irregular, like whoever, or whatever, was following us had broken into a sprint. The dragging sound was still there too, scraping against the wall in uneven bursts, as though something heavy was being hauled up each step. "Up," Mark said, already moving. His voice cracked, but there was no hesitation. We took the stairs again, spiraling upward past the second floor, then the third. The stairwell smelled different now, less of damp concrete and more like antiseptic, sharp and sterile, the way a freshly cleaned hospital room smells right before a patient is brought in. When we reached the fourth floor landing, the door was slightly ajar. A thin strip of light spilled into the stairwell, pale and almost too bright after the dimness below. I glanced at Mark. He nodded. We slipped inside. The hallway here was wrong. Not in the obvious horror movie way, no blood on the walls, no flickering lights, but in the way it looked too perfect. The floor tiles were spotless, the walls were freshly painted, and down the hall I could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beeping of medical monitors. But this hospital was abandoned. Mark raised his camera and hit record. I kept my flashlight low, scanning the doors. Each one had a small plastic nameplate with a patient's name etched in neat black letters. I recognized one almost immediately, my old neighbor, Mrs. Langley. She died 2 years ago. A shadow moved at the far end of the hall. It was quick, just enough to make me question if I'd seen it. Mark didn't seem to notice. He was focused on a door halfway down. It was closed, but a faint warmth radiated from the seam like there was a heater blasting inside. He reached for the handle. It turned without resistance. The room was small, with a single bed in the center. The sheets were tucked tight. A fresh pitcher of water sat on the bedside table, and a monitor by the bed beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. I stepped closer and saw the display, heart rate 62 BPM. The bed was empty. Mark circled the room, filming every angle. This is impossible," he muttered. He touched the sheets. "They're warm, like really warm." Before I could answer, the monitor's beeping sped up. 65, 70, 78. It kept climbing, the steady beeps turning frantic. My chest tightened and I realized the warmth in the room was intensifying, almost suffocating. Then all at once the beeping stopped. Flatline, the silence was deafening. From the hallway came a soft knock. 3 times, slow, deliberate. Mark and I froze. The knock came again, closer this time. But it wasn't on the hallway wall, it was on the room's window. Except we were on the 4th floor, and the window faced the old parking lot 4 stories down. I didn't want to look, but I did. The glass was fogged over from the heat inside, and through the condensation, I saw the faint outline of a hand pressing against it from the outside. Mark's camera whirred as he zoomed in. The hand slid slowly downward, leaving a streak through the fog, until the fingertips disappeared below the frame. We didn't wait to see more. Mark shoved the door open and we bolted back into the hallway. The hum of the lights was louder now, and behind us, I heard the sound of multiple doors clicking open one after another, as though every room in the hall was emptying at once. We ran for the stairwell, but when we reached it, the door we'd come through was gone. In its place was a smooth, unbroken wall. Mark spun around, his breathing ragged. Where the hell? That's when the lights overhead began to flicker. Not all at once, but in sequence, starting at the far end of the hallway and moving toward us. With each flicker, I could see shapes stepping into the corridor from the open rooms, figures in hospital gowns, heads tilted at unnatural angles, moving without sound. And they were coming straight for us. The hallway felt narrower now, the air heavier, as if every breath I took was being measured and weighed by the figures approaching. They didn't run, they didn't stumble, they just advanced, each step perfectly in sync, bare feet slapping softly against the tiles. The sound was almost hypnotic, tap, 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 echoing in my skull. Mark grabbed my arm. "Elevator," he hissed, pointing to a set of doors halfway down the opposite hall. The flickering lights were chasing us from behind, and the shadows of the patients were stretching unnaturally long toward us. We ran. The elevator panel was lit, a small red arrow pointing up. That alone made my stomach twist. There was no power to this building, or at least there wasn't supposed to be. Mark slammed his hand on the call button. The light above the doors blinked once, then the doors slid open without a sound. Inside, the elevator was spotless. Stainless steel walls gleamed, and the faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air. A soft, instrumental version of Moon River played from a hidden speaker. The normalcy of it was somehow worse than the hallway. We stepped in and the doors closed instantly. Mark jabbed at the lobby button, but the panel lit up for B2 instead. "Basement 2, I said, my voice trembling. "We didn't pick that." The elevator began to descend, smooth and silent. The music kept playing, but the notes began to distort, stretching into something off-key, like a record warping in heat. My reflection in the mirrored walls shimmered, bending slightly out of shape. Mark tried hitting the emergency stop, but the button did nothing. He swore under his breath, stepping back as the floor numbers ticked past B1. When the doors opened, there was no ding, no announcement, just darkness. My flashlight's beam cut through the black, revealing a narrow corridor lined with metal doors on both sides. Each had a small square window at eye level, covered in reinforced mesh. From somewhere deep in the hall came the sound of breathing, not heavy or panicked, slow, steady, and deliberate. We stepped out because staying in the elevator felt like a worse trap. The moment we did, the doors slid shut behind us and the panel light went dark. Mark's camera was still rolling, its small red light the only other illumination besides my flashlight. He whispered, "These look like isolation rooms." I glanced through the first window we passed. The inside was bare, just a bed bolted to the floor and a metal drain in the center. The sheets were rumpled and the pillow had an indent like someone had been lying there moments ago. We passed another door, then another, all identical until we reached the fifth. The window was smeared from the inside, streaked with something brownish red. My stomach knotted. I leaned in, angling the flashlight through the mesh. Someone was standing in the corner. They faced the wall, completely still, their hospital gown hanging loosely from bony shoulders. Their head was tilted sharply to one side, like their neck had given up halfway through turning. I whispered, "Mark, we need to go." But the figure twitched. Slowly their head turned, not their body, just the head, until I could see the faint outline of their face. The mouth was stretched into a grin far too wide, the the skin around it cracked and raw, as if smiling had been forced for too long. The breathing sound grew louder, and then it hit me. It wasn't coming from the figure in the cell. It was coming from further down the hall. The overhead lights began to flicker again, but here in the basement, the flicker revealed something else, brief flashes of other figures behind the metal doors. In some cells, they pressed their faces against the glass. In others, they pounded slowly, rhythmically, as if matching some unheard heartbeat. Mark's voice was barely audible. "This isn't a hospital anymore." We backed away, moving toward where the elevator had been. But when we reached the spot, it was just another door. No call button, no panel. The breathing was now so close it felt like it was on the back of my neck. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and froze. At the end of the hall stood a tall figure, easily 7 feet, its face obscured by a stained surgical mask. Its hands were gloved, but long blackened nails pushed through the tips like claws breaking through fabric. In its right hand it held something, a long, curved piece of metal that glinted under the flickering lights. It began to walk toward us, each step echoing louder than it should. Mark whispered, "Run," and I didn't argue. We bolted past the isolation rooms, the pounding from inside them growing frantic as we passed, like the things inside wanted out. My heart hammered in my ears. Halfway down, I glanced back, just once, and saw that the tall figure was no longer walking. It was running. We ran until my lungs burned, until the pounding in the isolation rooms blurred with the thud of our shoes. And when the tall figure's sprint turned into that awful, long-striding lope, we dove through the first unlocked door we found. A supply closet with a metal latch that luckily caught on the first try. I killed my flashlight and we stood there in total dark, chests heaving, listening. The closet smelled like bleach and rubber bands. Somewhere above the ceiling, a thin duct rattled like a coin in a dryer. Mark eased his camera down, the tiny tally light glowing red between us like an ember. The footsteps reached the door and stopped. For 3 long seconds, no sound, then a soft scrape along the threshold like a gloved fingertip testing the gap. I could hear Mark counting in his head, the same beat we used to calm ourselves on bad shoots. I counted with him. On 8, a new sound, a faint chime 2 corridors over, the kind of single, sterile ding you only hear when an elevator arrives. The footsteps moved away. We waited 30 more before daring to breathe. I thumbed the light back on and swept the shelves. Masks in paper sleeves, Roman IV tubing in plastic, a stack of laminated procedure cards yellowed at the edges. Behind a crate of exam gloves, something caught the beam. A taped-up page torn from a floor plan, smeared with fingerprints. It was titled B2 Services and showed our hall feeding into a service passage that bent around to loading dock/waste. Someone had circled the dock in blue pen and drawn a shaky arrow that said out. More important, hanging from a nail below the map was a long brass key fob labeled Fire Exit Crosscar. Mark lifted it off, mouthed, "Thank God," and we eased the latch. The hall outside looked empty, but the temperature had climbed another few degrees. A low hum vibrated the drywall like a bass line you feel more than hear. We moved fast, following the plan to a fire door set into a blank wall. The key bit home on the second try. The door popped and a wash of warm air spilled over us. The sour-sweet hospital mix of disinfectant and something human that heat always pulls out of fabric. The cross corridor beyond was different from the isolation wing. Bright, too clean, with a nurse's station sitting like an island under humming LEDs. A digital wall clock reads 02:14. The station's monitors were on. They shouldn't have been. I crept to the counter and peered at the screens. They showed bed numbers in B2 and B1 with live vitals, heart rate, O2 sats, green lines marching steadily across black, updating in real time. One bed flashed alert, temp rise, then cleared as if someone had acknowledged it. Next to the keyboard sat a ceramic mug with a chipped rim. Steam no longer rose from it, but when I touched the handle it was still faintly warm. Mark filmed the mug, the screens, the clock, and then the logbook. Its last entry was today's date, written in a rushed hand. Night rounds complete, all beds prepped, do not power down. The pen lay uncapped across the page. We didn't say a word. I scanned for the service passage on the plan posted behind the station. A gray door with a staff-only placard matched the drawing. We slipped through into the underbelly of the building. Concrete floor, painted cinder block, low ceiling crosshatched with pipe and cable tray. Hot air rolled out of the ductwork, stealing the breath from my throat. The hum here was mechanical, blowers, pumps, a distant diesel generator working under load. It explained the warmth, but not the beds. Arrows stenciled on the wall pointed sterile supply right arrow and laundry right arrow. Beneath them, someone had hand-painted dock with a crooked arrow and 3 exclamation points. We followed it, our shadows skittering over valves and gauges, past an emergency shower, past a maintenance cart with wrenches laid out in a neat line like someone had just stepped away. Halfway to the dock, a cart wheel squeaked somewhere ahead. We killed our lights and hugged the wall. The squeak came again, closer this time, a gurney's casters complaining under weight. I could hear the whisper of sheets, the sticky rip of tape coming off a roll. When the corner ahead washed in a low sodium glow, I dared a peek. The service corridor opened into a small anteroom, the kind with double doors for infection control. One door stood ajar, its magnetic locks red LED blinking as if waiting for a badge swipe that had never come. A crash cart blocked it from closing, drawers half open, defib pads coiled on top. Beyond the door, the air took on that cooled tin smell of negative pressure rooms. Mark held the door with his foot, sliming through the gap. I followed sideways, the key fob digging into my ribs. Inside, the walls were lined with pegboards. Dozens of patient ID bands hung there, each looped on a hook, each with a name and a date. Some were sun-faded, some so new the plastic still had a stiffness to it. I didn't want to look, but my eyes dragged along the rows until they snagged on a familiar surname, mine. First initial right, birth year right. My mouth went dry. Coincidence, Mark whispered, but it sounded like a lie told to both of us. We pushed through the second set of doors and the temperature dropped 5 degrees. Motion sensors tripped a row of industrial fixtures one by one, revealing the loading dock like a stage. High roll-up doors at the back, pallet jacks in a line, plastic strip curtains rippling slowly in a draft. A forklift sat with its key in the ignition, dash lights blinking their idiot lights. The bay door labeled 3 was half open, chain spool jammed, leaving a gap 2 feet high. Cold air leaked through it, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and diesel. The outside world. Mark made for it, dropping to one knee to gauge the clearance. "We can slide under," he said, breath steaming. Behind us, somewhere in the maze of service halls, something heavy thudded to the floor. We both flinched and moved in sync. He shoved his camera through the gap. I pulled the crash cart across the door behind us to buy seconds we didn't have. I hit the wall switch. The roll-up motor whined, didn't engage. The chain hung slack, greasy. "Manual," I said, grabbing the pull cord. Together we hauled. The door coughed up another 6 inches and stuck. It would be tight, but doable. "You first," Mark said. I shook my head and jammed the key fob into his palm. "If it drops, you can raise it." He didn't argue long. He slid flat, shoulders scraping the rubber gasket, boots kicking for leverage, and popped out the other side. His camera, already through, tilted and stared up at me, the tally light blinking like a heartbeat. I got on my stomach and wriggled forward until my face was a foot from the night air. That's when the motion lights in the yard snapped on in sequence. 1, 2, 3, washing the loading area in harsh white. For a half second, my brain didn't process what I was looking at. Then it did. Dozens of hospital beds stood in rows on the cracked concrete, wheel brakes set, sheets tucked tight, pillows fluffed. In the cold night, their surfaces steamed, heat bleeding into the air in thin veils. Each mattress bore the unmistakable oval of a human body's weight just risen. The nearest pillow still had the shallow hollow where a head had been. Beyond the rows, exit lanes painted on the asphalt stretched to a chain-link fence. The gate was open. A trail of wet, barefoot prints led through it into the dark. "Don't move," Mark hissed from outside, but not at me. His voice had flattened like he'd pressed it between his teeth to keep it from shaking. I twisted my neck and saw why. On the far side of the dock, behind the plastic strip curtains we just passed, a tall silhouette had arrived, perfectly still, mask pale against the gloom. It lifted one hand slowly and curled its fingers around the chain. The roll-up shuddered, then began to come down. The roll-up door kept lowering in slow, mechanical jerks, the rattling chain grinding through the track. I shoved my shoulders forward, dirt and grit biting into my palms as I pushed myself under the narrowing gap. Cold air slapped my face, sharp and wet, like diving into a winter river. Behind me, Mark's voice was a muffled shout, faster, but the words seemed swallowed by the hum of the dock machinery. My jacket snagged on the bottom lip, tearing with a sound that made my skin crawl. I tumbled out onto the cracked asphalt, my knees buckling on impact, and rolled toward the nearest row of beds. The door slammed shut behind me with a final metallic clang. The sudden silence was worse than any noise. Mark stood a few feet away, camera clutched tight against his chest, his breath making short, white bursts in the frigid air. The rows of beds stretched on, perfectly aligned like a military inspection, each one with those still warm impressions on the sheets, each one steaming faintly in the night. The scent here was nauseating, hospital detergent clinging to the linens, mingled with something metallic and faintly sweet, like blood that's just begun to dry. We didn't speak. We didn't dare. Every instinct told me that speaking here would be like striking a match in a gas leak. I stepped to the nearest bed and laid a hand on the mattress. The warmth seeped into my palm, human warmth, not the residual heat from the building. Recent, too recent. Mark tapped my arm and pointed toward the open gate at the far end of the yard. Beyond the chain-link fence, the wet footprints we'd seen earlier glistened in the sodium lights, winding into the darkness. Some prints were small, like a child's. Others were wide and flat, the toes unnervingly long. My gut twisted. We started toward the gate, our steps soundless on the damp concrete. Halfway there, the light above us flickered, buzzing like an angry insect. Then, click, it died. The yard fell into shadows, the beds turning into pale, skeletal shapes in the gloom. Somewhere to our left, fabric rustled. We froze. Another rustle, closer this time, like a bedsheet being pulled taut. I swung my flashlight toward the sound and instantly wished I hadn't. One of the bed's sheet covers bulged in the center, slowly rising and falling as though something beneath was breathing. The corners of the fitted sheet stretched, the fabric whining softly. Mark's breathing hitched. He raised his camera and the red tally light blinked in time with my pulse. The bulge stopped moving. Then in one sharp motion it slumped flat, as if whatever had been there simply vanished. The mattress gave a low hiss, steam pouring from its surface as though it had been holding something hot inside. A bead of condensation slid down the steel bed frame and dropped onto the asphalt with a tiny pat. That was enough. We bolted for the gate, splashing through puddles, our shoes smacking the wet pavement. My mind locked onto a single thought: get out, get out, get out. We slipped through the open chain link, the metal tangling in my jacket sleeve before tearing loose. The footprints continued beyond, leading down what looked like an old service road that curved out of sight into a line of skeletal trees. The further we went, the quieter it got. No hum of generators, no buzz of sodium lights, just our footsteps and the faint trickle of water somewhere ahead. I could almost believe we'd left the hospital grounds entirely until I saw the brick archway. It was built into a slope, half hidden by weeds and years of neglect, the mortar crumbling in places. Above the arch, in rusted metal letters, was a single word: morgue. The footprints led directly inside. Mark and I stopped at the threshold. The air that drifted out was warmer than the night, heavy with the cloying smell of damp stone and something far worse underneath, a sweetness that spoke of decay slowed but not stopped. My flashlight beam caught a narrow stairway descending into the dark, the concrete slick with moisture. Mark looked at me, eyes wide, waiting for me to decide. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run until the beds and the dock and the masked figure were just bad dreams. But something in my chest locked up. The footprints were fresh. Whoever, whatever had been in those beds was still moving, still close, and some deep, unshakable part of me needed to know where they had gone. I stepped under the arch, the beam of my light trembling on the wet stairs. The sound of our shoes slapping the stone echoed in the close space, chasing us down into the dark. Halfway down, the air grew thicker, warmer, as though the morgue was holding its breath. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a low corridor lined with tile the color of old teeth. Doors lined both sides, some hanging open to reveal empty metal gurneys and cabinets with their drawers pulled halfway out. Others were shut tight, their small glass panes fogged from within. We followed the footprints past the doors, deeper into the corridor, until they stopped abruptly in front of a set of heavy double doors painted a dull, sickly green. The handles were slick when I gripped them, not with moisture, but with something faintly greasy that clung to my skin. From beyond the doors came a sound I'll never forget: slow, steady breathing. Not mechanical, not recorded. Human. I looked at Mark, my hand still on the handle. His camera's tally light blinked once, twice, 3 times. I pushed. The doors swung inward, and in the dim light of the room beyond we saw them. They were all standing. They were lined up in rows, just like the beds upstairs, but this time there were no sheets, no blankets, only bodies, dozens of them, men, women, even children. They stood perfectly still, bare feet flat on the cold tile, their skin pale and waxy under the dim overhead bulbs. Their eyes were open, but they didn't blink, and every single one of them was facing the door, facing us. Mark's camera made a faint whir as it focused. The sound felt deafening in the thick, humid air. I felt it then, heat radiating from them, the same unnatural warmth I'd felt in the beds. My mouth went dry. This wasn't rigor mortis. These people weren't lying in drawers. They were vertical, breathing, and somehow waiting. The first row was close enough that I could see the condensation forming at the edges of their lips, like steam on a mirror. One man's chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm. His pupils tracked me as I shifted my weight. I couldn't tell if it was curiosity or hunger. Mark took a step forward, his foot squeaking against the wet tile. That tiny sound broke whatever invisible stillness had been holding them in place. Heads began to tilt, one by one, in jerky, unnatural motions, like dolls being adjusted by an unseen hand. Their mouths opened, not wide enough to scream, just enough to let out a low, breathy hum that vibrated through my bones. It wasn't in unison. It rippled from one end of the room to the other, like a wave. My instinct screamed to run, but something in that sound rooted me to the spot. My thoughts felt slowed, like each syllable of that hum was wrapping around my brain, dulling my edges. Mark's camera lowered slightly, his breathing evening out as if he'd forgotten why we were here. I forced my eyes away from them, scanning the room for another exit. In the far corner, past the third row, I spotted a narrow doorway, no door, just a black opening leading deeper underground. The footprints, still damp, still sharp, led straight toward it. I grabbed Mark's sleeve and yanked. His head jerked toward me, eyes glassy, and for a second I thought he'd shove me away. But then something, maybe the desperation in my grip, snapped him out of it. He nodded once, and we started edging along the wall, careful not to brush against any of the people. They didn't move to block us, but their heads turned to follow. That hum deepened, picking up a strange, syncopated rhythm. I realized then, it wasn't random. They were breathing in patterns, like a code, passing something between them without words. The doorway was closer now. I could feel the air change, cooler, drier, smelling faintly of dust and soil. My hand brushed the edge of the opening and my skin prickled. The darkness beyond felt heavier, as if it had weight. We slipped through and the hum cut off instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. The silence on the other side was so complete that my own breathing sounded wrong, too loud, almost intrusive. The narrow corridor ahead was earthen, the tile giving way to packed dirt walls reinforced with rotting wooden beams. My flashlight beam caught faint scratch marks along the walls, long parallel grooves that were too deep to be made by fingernails. Mark glanced back once. I did too, and wished I hadn't. They were still there, lined up in the doorway, their faces just barely lit by the flickering bulb behind them. They didn't step forward. They didn't need to. Somehow I knew they were going to wait. We pressed on. The passage sloped downward, the ceiling lowering until we had to stoop. The smell of soil grew stronger, mingled with something else, wet stone and the faint, unmistakable tang of rust. My light wavered over the floor and I saw puddles again, but these weren't water. The liquid was darker, thicker, clinging to the dirt in sluggish rivulets. The slope ended in a small chamber no bigger than a living room. The walls were studded with alcoves, each holding what looked like an old, rusted hospital gurney. Some were empty, others weren't. I moved closer to one and my breath caught. It wasn't a corpse, not exactly. It was a person lying perfectly still, their skin pale and almost translucent, eyes shut but darting rapidly beneath the lids. Their chest rose and fell in shallow, mechanical breaths. A thick, dark tube ran from their mouth down into the floor, pulsing faintly, like it was alive. Mark's hand clamped onto my arm, his fingers digging in hard. "We have to go," he whispered. His voice was raw, strained, almost breaking. I turned to answer and froze. From the tunnel we'd just come through, the hum had returned. Louder now, faster, and it was getting closer. The hum was no longer a distant vibration. It was in the walls, in the floor, in my ribs. It felt like every beam of rotting wood around us was resonating with that sound. Mark's eyes darted to the tunnel entrance, then back to me. His mouth moved like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. I knew without asking, if we stayed, they'd reach us. And if they reached us, we'd end up like the ones in the gurneys, breathing but not living. I turned to run, but something shifted in the air. A pull, subtle at first, like a gentle current pushing against my chest. It wasn't coming from the tunnel. It was coming from the floor. My boots sank half an inch into the packed dirt, and the sensation crawled up my legs like icy tendrils wrapping around my muscles. Mark stumbled toward the nearest gurney, grabbing the frame to steady himself. The person lying there twitched under his touch. Their eyes flew open, bloodshot and rolling wildly, and a strangled sound ripped from their throat. It wasn't a scream. It was the hum, raw and jagged, spilling out of them like they'd been holding it back for years. The others in the alcoves began to stir, their fingers curling, chests rising in unison. The tubes in their throats pulsed faster, darker liquid rushing through them toward whatever lay beneath the dirt. My stomach churned. That liquid wasn't rust-stained water, it was blood. The hum from the tunnel was almost at the entrance now. My flashlight beam caught the shadows of figures spilling into view. Those same pale, upright patients, moving without urgency like they knew we couldn't escape. Their heads tilted in jerks, the flickering bulb behind them throwing long, warped silhouettes across the earthen walls. "Back!" I hissed to Mark, yanking him toward the far side of the chamber. That's when I noticed it, a narrow crack in the wall, half hidden behind a collapsed beam. The air seeping from it was colder than anything in the hospital, and it carried the faint metallic tang of outside air. We squeezed into it sideways, the wood splintering against my jacket. The hum swelled behind us, then hit a sudden peak that made my vision blur. It was more than sound now, it was pressure, pushing at the inside of my skull, making my teeth ache. The crack opened into another tunnel, this one barely wide enough for one person at a time. The dirt here was damp, crumbling under our boots. We moved as fast as we could without bringing the whole thing down on us. The hum followed, duller now but still there, like it was crawling through the soil itself. After what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute, the tunnel tilted upward. A faint light appeared ahead, dim, flickering, unnatural. As we drew closer, I realized it wasn't daylight. It was the pale blue glow of a single fluorescent bulb swaying gently from a wire. We emerged into a room I couldn't place at first. Then I saw the tiled walls, the broken surgical lamps, and the rusted rails on the floor. It was an operating theater, but one that looked abandoned for decades, except for the fact that the table in the center wasn't empty. Something lay on it under a stained sheet, the outline humanoid but wrong in ways I couldn't name. The sheet rose and fell slowly, like it was breathing. At the head of the table stood a single figure in a shredded hospital gown, their back to us, shoulders rising and falling in time with the hum we thought we'd left behind. Mark's hand tightened on my wrist. He shook his head, mouthing, "Don't move." The figure's head turned, not all the way, just enough for me to see the edge of their face. Their skin was stretched too tight, their jaw trembling with the effort of holding something in. And then I realized. The hum wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from under the sheet. and whatever was beneath it was starting to sit up. The rise and fall of the sheet slowed, then stopped, as if whatever was underneath was holding its breath. Mark's grip on my arm was a vise now, his nails digging through my jacket. I wanted to back away, to melt into the shadowed corner of the room, but my feet wouldn't move. The hum had shifted, lower, deeper, like a massive engine idling beneath the floor. The figure in the shredded gown didn't turn all the way toward us. Instead, they stepped aside, just a fraction, like they were presenting the thing on the table. The sheet twitched once, twice. Then it began to slide toward the foot of the bed on its own. First came the smell, rot layered over antiseptic, like a morgue that had never been cleaned. My eyes watered as pale, bony fingers emerged from under the sheet. They weren't moving in a way that matched human anatomy. The joints bent subtly wrong, as if they'd been broken and reset too many times. The skin was the color of candle wax, stretched so thin I could see the faint blue veins beneath. The fingers curled around the edge of the table, and slowly, painfully slowly, the head emerged. The hair was patchy, clumps missing as if torn out in handfuls. The eyes were sunken, ringed in black but wide open, staring not at us but at the ceiling. Its mouth hung slack, and from deep inside came that same pulsing hum, vibrating the air between us. The person, if I could call it that, sat fully upright. I saw the tubes trailing from its chest, not into machines but into the floor, disappearing between cracked tiles. I followed the tubes with my eyes, tracing them to small circular grates at the edges of the room. Something in the grates moved fast, like a ripple under black water. Mark whispered, "We have to go," but the moment he said it, the thing's head snapped toward us. Not turned, snapped like a puppet's head wrenched by an invisible string. The hum spiked, sharp enough to make my ears pop. The figure in the hospital gown finally faced us fully. Up close, their eyes were worse, milky white, darting in tiny, insect-like movements. They raised one hand toward us, palm out, and the humming from the thing on the table became a shriek. The grates in the floor burst open. Something long and jointed slithered out, arms or legs or some combination of both, tipped with hooked, wet claws. They moved faster than I thought possible, scraping across the tile toward us. Mark shoved me toward the door, but the tunnel behind us was gone. Where we'd crawled through was now a solid wall of damp brick, as if it had been there for decades. The claws closed the distance in seconds. One scraped against my boot, leaving a line of deep gouges in the leather. I kicked at it instinctively and it retreated, but only for a breath. The hum from the table was now pounding in my chest, and the creature beneath the sheet was standing. I didn't understand how its legs held it. They were too thin, bending at angles that made my stomach churn. It took one step toward us, the claws tightening their circle, the hospital-gowned figure watching with a stillness more terrifying than the creature itself. Mark scanned the room wildly. His eyes locked on something, a narrow service hatch halfway up the wall, partially hidden behind a dangling surgical lamp. He didn't speak. He just grabbed my arm and hauled me toward it. The claws lashed out, tearing a long strip from my sleeve. We reached the hatch. It was rusted shut, but Mark slammed his shoulder into it again and again until it gave. The metal groaned like an animal in pain, and the smell that rushed out was worse than the room we were leaving. Behind us, the hum shifted again, now high and keening, like it knew we'd found a way out. The creature on the table lunged forward, the tubes ripping free from its chest with wet, tearing sounds. The hooks scraped the floor faster now. I scrambled through the hatch first, the jagged metal tearing at my jeans. Mark followed, and we slammed it shut behind us just as the first claw struck the other side with enough force to dent the steel. The passage we'd entered was narrow, lined with ancient pipes that hissed faint steam. The hum was muffled now, but still there, bleeding through the walls like it could follow us anywhere. Mark's voice was a rasp. That wasn't the basement. I didn't want to know what he meant, but as we started down the cramped corridor, I realized the air here wasn't stale. It was moving, like we were heading toward the surface. Or something that wanted us to think we were. The first thing I noticed was that the air in the corridor didn't just move. It pulsed, like the entire space was inhaling and exhaling in slow, deliberate rhythm. Each breath seemed to draw the dim, flickering light further down the tunnel, and every exhale sent a faint shiver along the walls, as though something inside them was shifting. Mark kept glancing behind us. His shoulders hunched like he expected one of those hooked limbs to come snaking through the hatch at any moment. But the metal door stayed shut, dented and trembling slightly in time with that muffled hum we'd left behind. It wasn't gone, just buried, as though the sound had seeped into the foundations of the building itself. The corridor sloped downward, not up. My sense of direction screamed that we were heading deeper underground, but my lungs told me the air was fresher. It smelled faintly of salt water and rust, almost like the deck of an old ship. I reached out to steady myself on one of the pipes and felt it tremble under my hand. Not from the building settling. This was different. This was rhythmic. Mark whispered, "Do you feel that?" I nodded. "It's like it's alive." The walls narrowed as we walked, forcing us closer together. In some places, the ceiling dipped so low we had to crouch. The deeper we went, the stronger the sense of being watched became, not from behind, but from every angle, as though unseen eyes tracked us from inside the walls. We came to a bend in the corridor, and for a moment I swore I heard voices. Not the echo of ours. These were whispering, layered, each one speaking over the other so I couldn't make out a single word. Mark froze, tilting his head. His face was pale, eyes locked on the darkness ahead. Then something brushed past my ankle. I jerked back, hitting the pipe hard enough to rattle it. A small, pale hand withdrew into a crack in the wall. Child-sized, fingers thin as twigs, the nails long and yellowed. "Keep moving," Mark hissed and pulled me forward before I could process what I'd seen. The whispers rose in pitch, angry now, echoing off the narrow walls until they were almost a wail. The corridor twisted and the light faded to nothing. We had no choice but to move in darkness, one hand trailing the wall to guide us. That's when the breathing stopped. The sudden silence made the air heavy, pressing down on my chest. My ears rang with the absence of sound. A faint glow appeared ahead, a doorway, but the light wasn't electric. Wavered, flickering like it came from open flames. Mark's pace slowed. "You smell that?" he asked. I did. It was meat, cooked but with the sour tang of rot underneath. We stepped into the glow and found ourselves in a chamber lined with hospital gurneys. Each bed held a shape under thin white sheets, perfectly still. The light came from oil lamps fixed high on the walls, their flames guttering in an unseen draft. Mark moved closer to one of the beds. "Don't," I warned, but he was already reaching for the sheet. He peeled it back an inch and froze. I leaned over to see. The body beneath was gray and shrunken, like it had been drained of all fluid. The skin was pulled tight over bone, but the chest rose and fell in a slow, unnatural rhythm. Mark took a step back, his face twisted. "They're breathing," he whispered. And then, in perfect unison, every figure under every sheet in the room inhaled at once. The sound was wet and deep, like the first gasp after being submerged too long. Their chests rose. Their heads turned toward us under the fabric. One sheet slipped away entirely, revealing a face I wish I could forget. Its eyes were sewn shut with black thread, but the skin around them twitched violently, as though something inside was trying to force them open. The mouth moved, working around invisible words, and then it spoke, not from the lips but from deep inside the chest. "You shouldn't have come here." The others echoed it, all in the same flat, inhuman tone, the sound reverberating in my bones. Mark grabbed my sleeve, pulling me toward a far exit. But the moment we turned, the breathing started again, faster now, harsher, like they were feeding on the air itself. The sheets began to rise, the shapes underneath pushing upright. And somewhere in the darkness beyond that far door, I heard the hum again. This time it was closer, much closer. We didn't run so much as stumble, half trip, half drag ourselves forward, boots slipping on the slick, half-flooded tile. My breath sounded too loud in my own ears, ragged and wet, but it was still drowned out by the breathing behind us. That sound was wrong. It wasn't just heavy, it was in sync, like 20 chests inhaling and exhaling together, each breath bubbling with something thick. The far door loomed ahead in the dim light, tall, metal, promising salvation. Every nerve in my body screamed go. If we could just get to it, slam it behind us, maybe we could figure out where the hell we were and how to get out. Mark reached it first. He yanked the handle. Nothing. He twisted, shoved with his shoulder, grunted in frustration. I caught up, grabbed the handle with both hands, pulled, pushed, nothing. It didn't even rattle like a locked door would. It stayed completely still, unmoving, the cold metal not even vibrating under my grip. I stepped back, confused, and that's when I realized it wasn't a door at all. The frame was painted onto the wall. The handle was a piece of rusted pipe bolted into the concrete, an illusion. Behind us, metal screeched on tile. Beds, gurneys were being pushed forward, slowly but steadily. That sound cut straight through my spine. I didn't dare turn around, but I could picture them. Those sewn-shut faces, those two long fingers, leaning forward on their beds and smiling. Mark's voice was shaking. "It's not real, none of this is real." But it was real. The smell was real, the stench of salt water and something rotting inside it. The heat radiating from the walls was real. And the low hum starting up again, it was definitely real. The hum grew louder, resonating through the floor, the walls, even my teeth. It was like the hospital itself was waking up. The overhead lights flickered, and I swear for a second, the walls seemed to pulse, pushing the air toward us in slow, deliberate waves. Then contact. Cold fingers brushed my shoulder, not Mark's. I turned. One of them was right there, less than a foot away. Its skin was pale and waxy, the black stitches over its eyes bulging slightly with each breath. Its mouth hung slack, and seawater, or something that looked like seawater, dripped out in a thin, steady stream. It leaned in close, and when it exhaled, I almost gagged. It was the smell of fish left in the sun for weeks, mixed with rust and mold. It whispered something. The syllables were wet, bubbling, ancient. I didn't recognize the language, but the sound alone made my stomach knot. The others answered, all of them, in unison. The same whisper repeated over and over, layered until it became a vibration in the air. My knees almost buckled from the pressure of it. Then Mark's flashlight snapped on. The sudden beam slashed through the dark, revealing the far corner of the room, low to the ground, half hidden behind a fallen cabinet. A vent. The grate was already hanging loose. I didn't think. I grabbed Mark's arm, yanking him toward it. My boots splashed through the shallow water, and I could hear the bed scraping faster behind us now. We dove for the vent, the metal biting into my knees as we shoved ourselves inside. It was tight, too tight for comfort, and the air was stale, thick with dust and something else, something faintly metallic. The further we crawled, the warmer the metal felt under my hands, as if the ducting itself was alive. The whispers followed us, muffled now, but still there. I could hear them echoing down the shaft, slipping into my ears no matter how hard I tried to block them out. Mark was moving fast ahead of me, his breathing short and sharp. My knees slipped on something slick, something I didn't want to think about. The shaft bent downward sharply, then up again, the change in angle making my arms burn as I pulled myself forward. Then light. A faint rectangle of pale yellow ahead. We pushed harder, driven by desperation, and finally tumbled out into a small, green-painted room. The paint peeled off in long strips, revealing damp plaster beneath. There was a door. This one was real wood, warped with age, rusted hinges barely holding it up. I rushed toward it, my heart hammering with hope and panic all at once. My hand reached for the handle and stopped. From the other side came a sound, not the whispers, not the hum, something heavier. A dragging sound, slow, steady, wet like a body wrapped in soaked cloth being pulled across concrete. Mark's eyes were wide. He mouthed no, but we couldn't go back. Behind us was the vent, and behind that them. I gripped the handle. It was warm. Not just warm, hot, almost like skin, almost like it was breathing. And then the handle turned from the other side. The handle turned slowly, almost lazily, like whatever was on the other side wasn't in any hurry. My hand was still on it, and I could feel each tiny vibration, like there was a pulse running through the metal. It was steady, too steady. I yanked my hand back and stepped away, but Mark grabbed my wrist, whispering harshly, "We can't let it open." Before I could respond, the door shuddered with a single, heavy impact from the other side. Not a knock, more like something leaning its full weight against it. The hinges groaned, and a fine powder of rust rained down onto the warped wooden floor. Mark grabbed an old metal chair from the corner, wedged it under the handle, and stepped back. We stood there, holding our breath, listening. The dragging sound came again, right up to the door. Then silence. My ears strained. The silence was worse. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was pressure, like the air in the room had thickened. My chest felt heavy, my breathing shallow. Mark's eyes darted around, scanning the walls, the ceiling, and then we both saw it. The green paint on the wall to my left was shifting. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks in the dim light, but then I realized the paint was blistering, tiny bubbles swelling and popping, leaving behind dark, wet patches. The wetness began to crawl upward, forming a line toward the ceiling. Mark backed up until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. "It's not just at the door," he whispered. "It's in here." A low groan vibrated through the floor, and the warped boards beneath our feet began to flex. I looked down just in time to see something thin and black, like a strand of seaweed, slip between the floorboards and retract again. The chair under the handle screeched as the door pushed outward an inch. Something pale slid through the gap, 2 fingers, too long, jointed wrong, ending in cracked yellow nails. They flexed slowly as if tasting the air. I froze. Mark's mouth opened in a silent scream, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then instinct took over. I lunged for the vent we'd come through, but the grate was gone, not hanging loose, gone. The wall was smooth where it had been, no sign of the opening. The fingers withdrew. The door didn't slam, didn't burst open. It just eased shut, the handle clicking softly into place. And then the whispering began again. Not behind the door, all around us. It came from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Words I still didn't understand, layered so thick they sounded like a swarm of insects in my skull. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me now. Mark staggered forward, clutching his head. We have to answer." I spun on him. "What are you talking about?" His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "They want us to answer. That's why they keep calling." Before I could grab him, he stepped toward the door, reached for the handle. His hand didn't hesitate. It was like he was sleepwalking. I rushed forward, grabbing his arm, pulling hard. "Mark, stop." His gaze finally snapped to me, clear for a split second. "If we don't, it'll come through anyway." The wood behind the peeling green paint began to bulge inward like something was pressing against it from all directions. Cracks spiderwebbed out from the center, and with each one the whispers grew louder, more urgent. My eyes darted around the room, looking for any possible way out. That's when I noticed the ceiling panel, a square of discolored plaster that looked different from the rest. It had faint scrape marks around the edges, as if it had been moved recently. Without thinking, I grabbed the metal chair, shoved it under the panel, and climbed up. My fingers dug into the soft plaster, pulling until it cracked away in chunks. Above was a narrow crawl space, dusty but open. "Up here," I hissed. Mark hesitated for only a second before scrambling up behind me. I hauled myself into the crawl space, the dust choking my lungs, then reached down to pull him through. The moment his legs cleared the opening, the door below burst inward with a sickening crack. The chair clattered to the floor. Something pale and wet spilled into the room. We didn't wait to see it. Crawling on hands and knees, we moved through the crawl space, the whispers still following us, now muffled but relentless. The space narrowed, forcing us to push forward on our stomachs, elbows scraping against rough wood. Somewhere ahead I saw light, a faint bluish glow. It didn't look like daylight, it looked colder. Mark's voice was a rasp. "That's not an exit." I didn't care, I just needed a way. We pushed forward inch by inch, the glow growing brighter. The air changed, warmer, damper, carrying that same scent of salt and rot. Then the floor of the crawl space vanished. One moment I was crawling, the next I was falling. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air out of my lungs. My head snapped back, and for a moment I saw nothing but a blur of that eerie blue light. Dust rained down from above where the crawl space had simply ended. No ladder, no gradual slope, just a drop into somewhere I was never supposed to be. Mark landed a second later, grunting in pain. He rolled onto his side, clutching his ribs. I crawled toward him, helping him sit up, but my eyes kept darting around the space we'd fallen into. It wasn't a room, not exactly. It was a chamber, round, maybe 30 feet across, with walls of damp stone that curved up into shadow. The blue light came from narrow slits carved into the walls, glowing faintly like veins of something alive. I could hear a faint hum from them, low and constant, almost like the vibration of deep machinery. What is this place?" Mark muttered, rubbing his side. I didn't answer because my eyes had caught on something in the center of the chamber, a bed. It was a hospital bed, but older, metal frame, chipped paint, a thin mattress with a white sheet pulled tight. The sheet wasn't dusty, it wasn't even cold, it was warm. I reached out a trembling hand, hovering just above the surface, and I swear I could feel heat radiating off it like someone had been lying there only moments before. Mark stood, his voice low. "Don't touch it." "Why?" I whispered. "Because," he started, but then stopped. His eyes widened. "Because we're not alone." I turned, following his gaze to the far wall. In one of the glowing slits, something moved. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then it leaned forward, A face, or at least something shaped like one. Pale, hairless, the skin stretched tight over bone. Its eyes were too large, reflecting the blue glow like the eyes of a cat. It didn't blink. It just stared. Mark and I backed up toward the opposite wall, keeping our eyes on it. The thing didn't come closer. It just slowly, deliberately placed one long hand on the edge of the slit. The fingers flexed, the nails scraping the stone with a sound that made my teeth ache. The hum in the walls grew louder. I realized then it wasn't machinery, it was breathing. Slow, deep, inhuman. The bed creaked. We both spun back toward it and my stomach dropped. The sheet was rising, as if something invisible was lying down beneath it. The indent formed slowly, the fabric tightening over a shape that was unmistakably human. Shoulders, chest, legs, and then the sheet shifted just a little and I caught a glimpse of skin underneath. Gray, veined. Mark bolted toward the chamber wall, searching for any way out. "There's gotta be a door, something," he hissed. But there wasn't. No doors, no vents. No openings except the crawlspace hole we'd fallen through, now far out of reach. The figure under the sheet sat up. The sheet slid off, folding neatly on the mattress as though placed there by invisible hands. The thing on the bed turned its head toward us and I saw its face clearly for the first time. It wasn't a stranger. It was me. Pale, lifeless eyes, my exact features, but wrong, like I'd been dead for days. I stumbled back, my hand slamming into the cold stone wall. My voice broke. "Mark!" But Mark wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on something behind me. I turned just as another figure emerged from the blue-lit slit. This one was taller, its movements jerky, like a puppet being pulled on strings. Its head tilted too far to one side and its mouth opened wide in a soundless scream. The hum in the walls became a roar. The light flared, and for a split second the chamber was filled with dozens of figures, some standing, some crawling, all pale, all wrong. Their faces were a blur between stranger and familiar, shifting like melting wax. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the bed. The heat, it's not just from someone lying there, it's a way out. Before I could argue, the first me, the one on the bed, lay back down, eyes closing, and the sheet began to pull itself over his body again. The air around it shimmered like heat haze over asphalt. Mark shoved me toward it. "Get in. Now." Every instinct in me screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. The figures were closing in, their movements no longer slow. I climbed onto the bed. The warmth hit me instantly, seeping into my bones. The hum faded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing that made my vision swim. My eyelids grew heavy, and the last thing I saw before darkness swallowed me was Mark climbing onto the bed beside me, and the pale version of myself opening its eyes again. I woke up gasping, my chest heaving like I'd been underwater for too long. The first thing I noticed was the absence of blue light. It was pitch black, so complete that I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. The bed beneath me was gone. I was lying on something cold and gritty like fine sand. Somewhere to my right, Mark's breathing was ragged. "You hear?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding small. "Where the hell are we?" He didn't answer. I heard him shifting around, hands brushing against the ground. Then his voice came again, lower, almost shaking. "This isn't sand." I reached down, fingers sifting through the gritty texture. It wasn't sand, it was ash, cold, soft, and endless. I pulled my hand back instinctively, brushing it off against my jeans, but it clung stubbornly as if it wanted to stay on my skin. There was no sound, no hum, no breathing, nothing. Just the faint echo of our own movements. I pushed myself up onto my knees trying to get a sense of direction, and that's when I noticed something else. We weren't alone. Shapes began to form in the darkness. Tall, thin silhouettes standing motionless at varying distances like statues scattered across a barren field. They were too still to be alive, but too wrong to be inanimate. Their proportions were off, limbs too long, heads tilted at unnatural angles. Mark rose beside me, his voice barely more than breath. "You see them?" I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see the gesture. "Don't move," I whispered. One of the shapes twitched. It was subtle, just a shift of the head, but it was enough. The stillness shattered. A dry, scraping sound filled the air as the silhouettes began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. Their movements weren't human, no rhythm, no pattern, just jerks and lunges that closed the distance between us far too quickly. "Run," I hissed, grabbing Mark's arm. We bolted, kicking up clouds of ash that swirled around our legs. The air grew thicker with every step, making it harder to breathe. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back, but I could hear them. Dozens of footfalls, sometimes near, sometimes impossibly far, like the space around us was folding in ways it shouldn't. A faint glow appeared ahead, a pale, sickly yellow light like a lantern burning low. We sprinted toward it, lungs burning, legs screaming, until the source became clear. It was a doorway, not a normal doorway. There was no frame, no wall, just a freestanding rectangle of dim light in the middle of the ash field. Beyond it, I could make out what looked like the hospital hallway from before, but the details were wrong. The walls bowed inward, the tiles warped as if I were looking at it through water. Mark didn't hesitate. He dove through. I followed, and for a moment I felt the same suffocating heat as the hospital bed, pressing against every inch of my skin. Then I was through, back in the hallway, but it wasn't empty. The corridor stretched far longer than it had before, and the walls pulsed gently, almost like they were breathing. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, stretching shadows that didn't match our movements. Mark stood a few feet ahead, staring at something on the floor. "They've been here," he muttered. I stepped closer and saw what he meant. The linoleum was scorched black, and in the middle of the burn mark was another hospital bed, just like the one in the chamber. The sheet was crumpled as if someone had just gotten up. The sound came back then. Not the hum, not breathing. This was different, a rhythmic, hollow knock. Slow at first, then quickening, like someone rapping their knuckles against wood. It echoed down the hallway, bouncing from wall to wall until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Mark looked at me, his eyes wide. "We're not supposed to be here." Before I could respond, the knocking stopped. Then, from somewhere far down the warped hallway, a voice called out. It was my voice. "Come back." Mark took a step back. "We need to leave now," but my feet wouldn't move. The voice came again, softer this time, like it was right behind my ear. "Come back, you left something behind." I spun, but there was nothing there. Just the long hallway stretching into flickering shadow. And then I realized Mark wasn't beside me anymore. I called his name, but the only answer was the sound of footsteps. His footsteps, fading into the distance, heading toward the voice. I ran after him, heart pounding, but with every step, the hallway seemed to stretch farther. The shadows grew deeper, and somewhere ahead, I thought I saw the pale outline of another bed. The hallway felt like it was pulling me forward, not because I wanted to go, but because there was nowhere else to go. The air thickened the further I ran, every breath tasting faintly metallic, like blood left out in the sun. Mark's figure stayed just ahead, always at the same distance no matter how hard I pushed myself. "Mark!" I shouted, but the sound barely carried. It was like my voice was being swallowed before it could reach him. He didn't even turn his head. I noticed something strange about the way he moved. His steps didn't match the sound. Footfalls echoed too slowly for his pace, like someone else was walking in sync but dragging their feet. And his arms, too stiff, swinging in short, mechanical arcs. I pushed harder, my shoes slapping against the warped linoleum, until I was close enough to see his head tilt slightly to the left. It was such a small movement, but it felt wrong. I'd seen Mark make that exact tilt before, only once, and it wasn't here. It was back in the ash field when one of those long-limbed silhouettes had twitched. That's when the lights flickered out completely. I froze, heart hammering in complete blackness. No sound, no breathing, no footsteps. Then, a single fluorescent bulb buzzed back to life ahead, casting a cone of cold light onto the floor. Mark was standing just at the edge of it, facing away from me. I took a slow step forward, my voice low. "Mark!" He didn't move. I stepped closer, now only a few feet away. That's when I saw it. His skin wasn't quite right. The texture rippled subtly under the flicker of the light, like something pressing and shifting beneath it. The hair on his head seemed almost placed, strands lying in unnatural, perfect alignment. And then he turned. Not all the way, just his head, slow, deliberate, rotating farther than it should have been able to. His eyes locked on mine, but they weren't Mark's eyes. The irises were too wide, swallowing the whites, and something inside them moved, like small shadows swimming under the surface. "Come back," it said in Mark's voice, but slower, like the words were being dragged out of a throat not made for speech. I staggered back, my heel catching on the floor. The thing wearing my friend's face stepped forward, the light casting its shadow long and thin across the wall. The outline wasn't human anymore, arms stretching almost to its knees, head tilted at an impossible angle. Then, without warning, it lunged. I dove sideways, slamming into the wall as its hand scraped against the spot where I'd been standing. The nails, or whatever they were, left deep gouges in the tile. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. The hallway twisted beneath my feet, bending left, then right, as if it didn't want me to find my way out. Every few seconds, I caught flashes of movement in the corner of my vision. Mark's shape, or something close to it, always keeping pace but never overtaking me. Somewhere behind me, the voice called out again, but this time it wasn't using Mark's tone. It was using mine. "You can't leave, you're already here." I didn't look back. I kept running until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed, until the hallway abruptly ended in a set of double doors. They were heavy steel, rusted at the hinges with no handles, just a narrow window at eye level, too fogged to see through. Something slammed against the doors from the other side. Once, twice, the metal groaned. I backed away, unsure whether to run back the way I came or brace for whatever was about to come through. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic beeping from behind the doors, like a heart monitor. It didn't make sense. That sound had been gone since we first entered the hospital. Why would it be here? The pounding stopped. Silence. Then slowly, the fog on the window began to clear, not evenly but in streaks, as if someone was dragging their fingers across it from the other side. Shapes appeared in the glass, faces pressed close, too close, dozens of them. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't hear, and then the doors flew open. I stumbled back as the hallway beyond was revealed. It wasn't a hallway at all. It was the chamber. The same chamber from the ash field, only now every bed was occupied. Figures lay under the sheets, faces turned toward me, eyes open and unblinking. In the far corner, one bed was empty. The beeping grew louder, syncing with the pounding of my heart. My legs felt heavy, like they were being pulled toward that empty bed, and standing beside it was Mark, or what was left of him. He smiled. The skin on his face stretched unnaturally with the motion, and from somewhere deep inside his chest came a wet, rattling sound. "They kept it warm for you," he said. Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes, because his eyes weren't his anymore. They were two black wells, so deep and so empty that I felt my thoughts slipping toward them. My feet moved on their own, the sound of my shoes muffled against the strange, soft floor. The beeping was steady, almost hypnotic. I glanced down and realized it wasn't coming from a monitor at all. It was coming from the bed itself. The mattress pulsed just slightly, like it was breathing. "Lie down," Mark said. His voice was calm now, coaxing, but underneath it I could hear something else. Multiple whispers, layered and overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The sound pressed at the inside of my skull, making it hard to think. I shook my head. "Mark, this isn't you. It's me," he cut in sharply. "It's always been me. They showed me what's underneath, and now I'm part of it. You can be too." I stepped back, but the moment my heel touched the floor, cold hands clamped around my ankles. I looked down and saw pale fingers emerging from under the nearest bed, gripping my legs with impossible strength. I kicked free, stumbling sideways, but more hands appeared, dozens of them reaching from beneath every bed in the room. Some grabbed at my clothes, others at my skin. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, blood, and something sweet and rotten. I bolted toward the door we'd come through, but it was gone. Just smooth wall, seamless as if it had never existed. My breath caught in my throat. "Nowhere to go," Mark said, tilting his head. "You think you can leave, but you've been here since the beginning." I wanted to scream at him, tell him he was wrong, but my voice died in my chest. The hands were pulling harder now, dragging me toward the empty bed. I dug my nails into the floor, scraping at the linoleum until it curled under my fingers, but it was useless. I felt the edge of the mattress press against my back. It was warm, too warm, like someone had just gotten up. The beeping quickened, matching my heartbeat. Mark leaned over me, his face inches from mine. "It won't hurt," he whispered. "Not for long." Something moved beneath the mattress. A lump shifting and writhing under the sheets, as if something inside was making room for me. "No," I gasped, twisting, but the hand surged up, gripping my arms, my shoulders, forcing me flat. The ceiling above seemed to ripple, the lights bending and distorting, and for a second I thought I saw faces in the glow, faces I recognized from town. Then from the far end of the room, a sound cut through everything. A metallic crash. Every head turned toward it, even Mark's. The hands froze. Another crash, louder this time, followed by the screech of metal tearing. And then I heard it, a voice shouting my name. "Get away from there." It was Alex. He was standing in the wreckage of a busted service elevator, wielding a rusted metal pipe. His face was pale, eyes wide, but there was a determination there I'd never seen before. Mark hissed, a wet animal sound, and in an instant the hands let go of me and surged toward Alex. "Run!" Alex yelled. I didn't hesitate. I rolled off the bed, hitting the floor hard, and sprinted toward the elevator. The pale figures were spilling from under the beds now, their limbs too long, their movements jerky, their faces stretched in grotesque imitations of human expressions. Alex swung the pipe, connecting with one of them. It let out a piercing shriek that seemed to shake the walls. I dove into the elevator shaft just as one of the figures lunged. Its fingers brushed my collar, tearing fabric, but Alex yanked me down and we both fell into the darkness below. We landed hard on something soft, piles of decayed hospital bedding. My vision swam. but I could hear them above us, clawing at the edges of the shaft, their voices overlapping in a chorus of anger and hunger. Alex grabbed my arm. "We don't have much time." "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded, breathless. "Looking for a way out," he said. "Found this instead, but we have to move before." A sharp, metallic screech echoed from above. The hands were coming down the walls, stretching unnaturally far, joints bending in ways they shouldn't. Alex's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel branching off from the shaft. Without another word, we scrambled into it, the sound of pursuit echoing behind us. The tunnel was cramped, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of mold. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each drop loud in the silence. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, but underneath it there was something else. A new sound. Faint at first, but growing louder. It was the beeping. The tunnel felt like it was getting narrower with every step. My shoulders scraped against the damp concrete walls, and each breath brought in the smell of rust and stagnant water. But what really made my skin crawl was the beeping. It wasn't echoing from behind us anymore. It was ahead, close. Alex stopped, raising a hand for me to do the same. The flashlight beam shook slightly in his grip, its circle of light trembling against the walls. "You hear it too, right?" he whispered. "Yeah," I said, my voice almost drowned out by the sound. Beep, beep, beep. Steady, mechanical, and wrong. We moved forward slowly, the water on the floor rising around our ankles. My shoes squelched with each step, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something under the surface was brushing against my skin. The tunnel turned sharply, and the beam of Alex's flashlight caught something metallic ahead. A hospital gurney, rusted and bent, wedged sideways across the passage. But it wasn't the gurney that made my stomach twist. It was the body on it, or at least what had been a body. The shape under the sheet was human in outline, but too still, too clean. No signs of rot or decay, just an unnatural smoothness like it had been preserved. The beeping was loudest here, coming from a small monitor hooked to its side. The green line on the screen moved in perfect rhythm with the sound, as if this thing, whatever it was, had a heartbeat. Alex reached for the sheet. "Don't," I said sharply, but it was too late. He pulled it back. Underneath was a face, my face. The same jawline, same eyes, same faint scar above the eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid, but the skin was pale and cold-looking, the lips slightly parted. I stumbled back. That's not possible." "It's not you," Alex said quickly, but his voice wavered. "It's..." The eyes opened. I froze. The pupils were blown wide, black, swallowing any trace of color. And when the mouth moved, it made no sound, but the beeping on the monitor sped up. Then, without warning, the body sat up. The motion was stiff, puppet-like, but the head tilted in a way that made my stomach churn. Alex raised the pipe again, but before he could swing, more beeping started up. From the shadows on either side of the tunnel, more gurneys slid forward, their wheels screeching against the wet floor. Each one held a shape under a sheet, and one by one, pale faces turned toward us. All of them were me. Some looked older, some younger. Some bore scars I didn't recognize, others were perfect copies. All breathing in unison, all staring with the same black eyes. "Run," Alex said. We pushed past the first gurney, the copy of me twisting its head unnaturally far to follow our movement. The tunnel ahead sloped downward, the air growing colder, the sound of beeping multiplying until it was deafening. My foot slipped on something soft. I looked down and saw bedding, thin hospital sheets floating in the water. They were stained dark in places, and when I stepped again, I felt something solid underneath, something shaped like an arm. The slope ended in a wide chamber, the ceiling low and dripping. The walls were lined with more beds, each one occupied by a version of me or Alex, lying perfectly still, monitors beeping beside them. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Alex's face was pale. "I think this is where they keep us, all of us." Before I could ask what he meant, a sound came from behind, a slow, deliberate splash. We turned to see one of the me-s standing in the entrance, head tilted, smiling faintly. Then another appeared, and another. They didn't rush us. They just walked forward, closing the distance one measured step at a time. I backed up until my shoulders hit a bed. The person lying there was another me, eyes closed, breathing slow. Without thinking, I touched their arm. The skin was warm, and then their eyes opened. A hand shot up, grabbing my wrist with crushing strength. I tried to pull away, but more hands joined in, from the beds, from the water, from the darkness itself. Alex swung the pipe, knocking one back, but 3 more took its place. The beeping from every monitor in the room synced into a single, rapid pulse, like a countdown. "They don't want us to leave," Alex gasped, struggling to keep them at bay. I looked around desperately and saw something at the far wall, a heavy steel door half submerged in the water. It had no handle, just a keycard slot. "They're hurting us," I realized aloud. "To where?" Alex shouted. Before I could answer, the door began to open on its own. A blinding white light poured in, so bright it burned my eyes. The figures stopped moving, all of them turning their heads toward the doorway in perfect unison. And from within the light, something stepped out. The light was so intense it felt like it was peeling the skin off my face. I had to shield my eyes, but even through the gaps between my fingers I could see movement. Slow, deliberate. The figure stepped forward, its outline human at first, but the longer I looked, the less certain I became. The limbs were too long, the joints bending in subtle ways that didn't match bone or muscle. Its head turned toward me and my stomach lurched. It had my face, not just my face, it had all of them. The features shifted like water. One second it was me, then Alex, then one of the pale copies from the gurneys. Each time it changed, it locked eyes with its previous version, like it was collecting them. Behind me, the other copies, the ones that had been closing in, dropped to their knees, heads bowed, beeping monitors slowing into a steady, unified rhythm. The whole chamber seemed to pulse with it. "Alex," I said, my voice shaking. "Can't be here." But Alex wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the thing. "It's beautiful," he whispered. I grabbed his arm. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't respond. His pupils were blown wide, the reflection of the white light filling his eyes. Slowly, he began to walk toward it, stepping into the water without hesitation. I tried to hold him back, but something yanked me from behind. I turned to see one of the gurney versions gripping my shoulder, its expression calm, almost sympathetic. "They all go back," it said. The voice was mine, but deeper, like it was coming from under the floor. "I'm not going anywhere," I spat, shoving it away. But more hands came, not pulling me toward the light, but holding me in place, forcing me to watch. Alex reached the figure. It cupped his face with one hand, and for a moment they stood completely still. Then the figure pushed, and Alex's skin seemed to ripple, his outline distorting like a reflection in disturbed water. His scream was muffled, swallowed, as his body collapsed inward, until there was nothing left but a thin, pale shell sinking into the water. The figure's chest rose slightly, as if it had just taken a deep breath, and when it looked back at me, it was wearing Alex's face. I struggled harder, my own copy straining to keep me still. My heartbeat was hammering, but the monitors had synced with it. Every beep felt like it was inside my skull. It began to walk toward me. I thrashed, my foot catching on something under the water, a metal pole from one of the gurneys. I gripped it tight, swinging hard when the figure reached for me. The blow connected with a wet crack, and for the first time it faltered. The light behind it flickered, dimmed, and I saw what lay beyond the door. Not a hallway, not a room, an endless black ocean. Waves rose and fell in slow motion, but the surface shimmered with faint outlines. Dozens, maybe hundreds of faces, each one gasping silently before sinking again. The smell of salt and decay rolled over me, and I realized the water wasn't just water. It was full of them, full of us. The figure recovered, tilting its head like it was curious. I backed toward the far wall, the cold concrete pressing into my spine. "You don't belong here," it said, this time in Alex's voice, perfect and exact. "Neither do you," I shot back, but the words felt hollow. It smiled, and for a split second it was my smile. The monitors spiked into a rapid fire, beeping again. The copies holding me suddenly released their grip and stepped back, melting into the shadows like obedient soldiers making way. The figure extended its hand. "Come see where they go." The light swelled, the doorway widening until the ocean beyond was all I could see. Something deep beneath the surface moved, a shadow so massive it warped the water. I thought of Alex, of the warm beds in the basement, of the countless versions of myself staring from pale faces, and I knew that whatever was in that ocean was the reason this place existed, and maybe the reason we existed. I took one step forward, the freezing water rising past my knees. The figure's hand was still outstretched, patient. And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in my car, parked outside the hospital. The sun was just rising, the windshield streaked with condensation. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but the seat beside me wasn't empty. Alex was there, staring straight ahead, and when he turned to look at me, his eyes were black,